For you very long. I am being challenged right now with what is called Bell palsy. But I know that God is a healer. So, though the left side of my face may be paralyzed at this particular time, I didn't know how hard it is to talk when you don't have the whole part of your whole face operating at the same time. But I'm happy and I'm glad to be here on today. I made a commitment to be here, so I thought it fitting, even though I'm in pressured in dealing with this, to be here.
Thank you, Lord.
Yesterday, I had the opportunity, I flew in back from New Jersey. I was at Rutgers University speaking with the youth there. And when Nicole and I was talking, and I told her that I would not mind coming. I wanted to do just that. When we think about trauma and the loss, the definition has already been given. But I want to thank Nicole for even inviting me to come into this space and even say a few words. And I thank each and every one of you for being here on today to just hear words. Hopefully something that I say will ignite you and cause you to not just look at our condition, but also to do something about the condition that we face. If we look in the United States on today, each year over 1,000 African American young men and women are killed at the hands of law enforcement. And even that statistic is actually outdated. I don't know if you ever heard of the grassroots, the Malcolm X grassroots. It said that every 28 minutes that a African American is killed by a police officer or a vigilante or someone to that effect. But if we look at those statistics and all of us being killed in the years between 2005 and 2015, the officers who was charged with murder or charged for killing our young men and young women, many of them have not been charged. Many of them are acquitted for what they have done. And so when we think about this, and we think about the trauma that we face as a community, one of the things that we are learning, is that we really have to examine ourselves first.
Right.
We are often taught when our young men or our young women behave badly to put them out, to not have anything to do with them. Let them grow up and let them become who they are. We're often taught that at age 18, they need to get on their own and begin to fend for their life. When in reality, they're still immature and they have not grown up to where they need to be mentally. Okay? And so the Caucasian people really know this. And they really support and keep their children right there with them.
Yes, they do.
Okay? We often find that ours is out on the streets a lot of times. And I'm saying all this to say this because I'm going to share with you about my son, but I also want to share with you true life.
Yeah.
And so I remember years ago, I've been ministering for over 30 years now. I remember years ago that I was in my prayer closet and the Lord began to show me a picture of my son. He began to show me that my son would go through some difficult things in his life, but that we would minister the Word of God together. Wow. And when I received that call, January 1st, 2009, we had just spent the day together because my birthday's the 31st, and I told him to take Bart to San Francisco. And he was like, no, we're just going to drive. And so my topic is on trauma and dealing with that trauma of loss, right? And so I told him to go ahead and take BART where it would be safe for him to take BART because he was an adult, just in case there was any drunk drivers out there, or if he was going to partake in drinking, then he would be safe because he would be able to take BART and he wouldn't have put anybody else's life in risk, and his life wouldn't be in risk. And so I received that phone call that morning that my son had been shot. And I didn't know at that time who shot him. I just know that they called and said he was shot. I jumped up. I said, "Where are you at?" I went to pick up his fiance and one of his friends and his girlfriend, and we went straight to the hospital. When I got to the hospital, some of his friends was there. And the first place I went to was into the chapel. And the nurse came or a social worker came and spoke to me and told me that his condition was very serious, that because when he was laying on the platform, when the officer pulled out the gun and shot him, it hit him and busted his lungs open in both lungs. And one of his lungs actually blew out, and the fragment from the bullet hitting the ground, when it came back in, it just shattered throughout his body, a lot of his organs. And so internally, he was bleeding like a leaky faucet all over the place inside. And so they came and said that they could not save him. They called me in there when they was trying to revive him, but he went on and he passed. And when I think about the trauma from losing Oscar, I look at myself and how I felt and what I went through. And one of the things that when we lose a loved one, and I don't just want to leave it at just losing my son, because when people face trauma, sometimes trauma is faced from a divorce.
Right.
Trauma is faced from a loss of property.
Yeah.
Trauma is faced from a job. Trauma is faced from losing a friendship, relationship with someone. And it hurts. And it stirs up all types of emotions. And so when I lost Oscar, one of the emotions that immediately came to me was feeling guilt, as if it was my fault for what had happened to him. I felt that if I would have just let him drive, that he would have still been alive. But as I prayed, God began to reveal, I don't know if he still would have been alive.
Right.
He could have gotten a car accident.
Right.
I mean, anything could have happened. Or I could have lost him to the prison system. Maybe he decided he was going to drink and drive.
Right.
Maybe he hit somebody else and that caused an accident and that person, demise. So the Lord began to just really show me in a lot of different scenarios of things that could have happened to really begin to give me peace about what happened with Oscar. And during that time, I was praying, I was saying, well, Lord, you said we were going to be in ministry together. And I was just going on, God, you said we would be in ministry together, but he's gone. How can we be in ministry together? And you said, and I was just having this powwow with the Lord because I talk to the Lord. Some of us are taught that you can't ask the Lord questions.
Absolutely. Yes, you can.
And if we're having a one-on-one relationship, and I'm talking to him and he's talking to me, I should be able to ask, or I should be able to say, God, this don't feel right. I don't like it.
Right.
I'm hurting. And have him respond back to me. And so as I was having that powwow, this was sometime after Oscar had died and we had the funeral, the Lord reminded me and showed me to look around. He reminded me that every place that my foot tread really is because of what happened to Oscar. The reason why I get to go across country, they wasn't looking for Wanda.
Right.
They heard about what happened with Oscar, and I'm just being a vessel
Right.
to be able to go those places and share what has happened.
That's all right.
And so as I began to really hear God and listen to God, and then begin to say, okay, God, what would you have me to say to people that you bring me in front of? And number one is, yes, loss is real. It hurts. It hurts when you lose a relationship. It hurts when you lose a child. And I've lost my father. I've lost a nephew. I've lost cousins, friends, aunts and uncles. But I want to tell you that it didn't compare to the loss of my son.
Yeah.
And people will say that, oh, I understand. I lost my cousin 3 weeks ago. And I'm like, okay. And I've learned how to be sweet about it. Because at first I was saying, I don't think you do understand, because every loss in reality is different.
Yes, yes.
Because the relationships are different.
Yeah.
And so when we think about trauma, Oscar was only 22 years old. So he wasn't fully mature to where he needed to be mature to. And in those 21 years, from his 18 through 21, he began to struggle with some issues that a lot of our young men struggle with. He went to jail. Yes, he did. But in that, I always reminded Oscar, we serve a forgiving God.
Yes.
And you can still do all things through Christ who strengthens you.
Yes.
And I say that to say because oftentimes in our communities, we look at our young men and even our young women, and we say, oh, what a shame. In reality, we ought to be grabbing that one and saying, what's going on, like we heard the conversations today.
Yeah.
Because we don't really know the trauma that they face.
Yeah.
And I say that, and I'm a witness to that, because when my son was killed, on the platform, his friends was right there. My son was seeing one of his friends being treated so badly, he stood up and said, listen, we need to talk to somebody who is in charge, because obviously you're not doing it right. We want to talk to somebody in charge. And the officer who he told that to did not like that and ran over and hit him. But when Oscar was on that platform and he was face down, and when the officer stood up and shot him in the back, and many people say, well, I think the officer made a mistake. Well, I want to tell you, if you look at the depositions and you look at from the very beginning, the officer knew exactly what he was doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
He knew exactly. So he began to try to say, well, I thought he was going for a gun. No, he knew he wasn't going for a gun. Okay? Well, he was resisting arrest. He tried to give all the same scenarios that they say and they give to all of our young black men when they are in trouble, when they kill them. The first thing, they got a gun, they're resisting arrest, they were aggressive, they were trying to fight me back. And so I'm saying all that to say is because the young brother who spoke earlier today, Mr. Smith, he's very right on point. We have to begin to not only police the police, but police our communities.
Right.
We got to know who's next door to us.
Right.
We got to know who's across the street from us.
Yeah.
And we have to build those relationships because our youth today are hurting.
Yeah.
And because they're hurting, they often act out. And then we want to know, why is our youth killing each other? Well, what have our youth seen?
Absolutely.
What have they faced themselves?
Yep.
And so because they have faced probably more than any of us in this room have seen, especially as older ones, they are seeing a lot more today than when I was growing up. I didn't see this stuff that they're seeing.
Right.
And it's for us to really begin to really be honest with them and talk to them to find out where they're at. And when we find out where they're at, it's important for us not to be judgmental because they're in that space.
Right.
But oftentimes, we in the church, again, we get holy before God. We forget where God delivered us from.
Absolutely.
And so when we see our young men and our young women going through stuff, we don't really want to help them. We want to say we're going to pray for them, and oftentimes we don't even pray for them. And not only do we not pray for them, but we get so with our nose up or so holy that we become no earthly good.
Yeah.
And God is calling us to turn it around, to become good, be earthly good in our communities.
Yes.
If it means just going to that young man and saying, what's going on? You know, how you doing today? Let's take a walk.
Yeah.
If it means just smiling at that young man, because
Yeah.
we don't, to be honest, we don't even want to talk.
Absolutely.
I had some sister say she lost her son, and she says, well, I ain't saying nothing to these young men because I'm scared of them all. And she meant that. And sometimes the young man is waiting
Right.
for us to say something
Right.
to help them
Right.
get to where they need to really be going.
Yeah.
And so when we think about traumatic loss, I think about how the young man was on the platform when Oscar died. How they witnessed him laying there, getting shot, telling the officers, I have a 4-year-old daughter, please don't shoot me, and still yet losing his life.
Wow.
I witnessed them horrified. Horrified. I witnessed how their lives changed so drastically.
Yeah.
No longer were they the same young men that laughed. They changed. They changed in many ways. So traumatic loss, if you don't have a relationship with God, and sometimes even when you have a relationship with God, can cause you to do all kind of things.
Yes, ma'am.
For these young men, I watched them as they went through the loss of their friend, their brother, who they'd known since 3rd and 2nd grade. I watched them begin to drink. I watched them begin to self-destruct. And so that's why I'm saying it's so important for us. When we see and hear of people being killed, not only does it affect the family, but it affects those around.
Yes.
And so in the process, thank you so much, in the process of my son losing his life, as his friends went through their process of trying to deal with death only the way only they knew how to deal with it, by drinking, by hanging out, not being able to work, we started hosting sessions to try to help them, because we realized that Oscar, even though he was killed, his death affected many people
Right.
all over.
Yeah.
And in his death affecting them, we said, well, what can we do to try to help? And so we started having counseling sessions at the church. We would invite them to come, and we would just sit and talk, because we knew that they were self-destructing themselves. And as many of our youth today doing that very same thing, because they don't know how to deal with what they face.
Right.
And so anger was one of the things that happened after the loss of Oscar. Many of the young men felt angry. When we face a loss and we deal with a traumatic loss, oftentimes anger stems up. But it's important for us to learn how to control that anger. We always say to people that you might be mad about it, but we don't want you to hurt yourself. So we want you to contact us, or we want you to just come hang out with us so we could talk with you, because it's important. We don't really want to share that. We don't have time because we're so busy in our lives. And so when we see people going through, we often don't have time to stop and to help them along the process. And so when we think about anger, and we think about how we deal with the loss of a loved one or the relationship, we have to realize that grief and loss is oftentimes like a roller coaster for many people. One day you're up, the next day you're down, the next day you're happy about something that person did, the next day you're sad about it. And then we say to people, well, how long are you going to deal with that? Get over it. Get over that loss. You shouldn't still be dwelling on it. It happened 10 years ago, Wanda. Get over it. Well, I'm here to tell you today that people just don't get over their losses.
Absolutely.
It might be 20 years, and they still may be dealing with the loss of a loved one. But what I can encourage you to do is, if you're facing loss and you're dealing with that, is to get around people and to begin to express yourself, to talk about it. Don't just hold it in, but talk about how you feel. And if you find friends that don't want to hear it, find somebody who does want to hear it.
Absolutely.
Because there are people in the circle that really don't want to know or hear it, or cannot relate to it. And so find people in your circle who will understand, who will listen to you as you talk, as you share, as you cry. Because it's okay to cry.
Yes, it is.
So we know that the loss or grief is a deep sorrow, and it's caused by someone's death. And in that sorrow, it's a lot of misery, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of despair, there's a lot of mourning. And when I think about what happened with Oscar, I looked finally at the video probably a year or two later, and it propelled something in me. There's a story in the Bible regarding a lady named Rizpah, and she had 2 sons. And Saul, because he went and was not supposed to kill the Gibeonites, he did it anyway. And they came back and they wanted some kind of revenge. They wanted something for what Saul had done. And the Bible says that they wanted 7 of Saul's sons. And they had took 2 of Rizpah's sons in particular. And they hung, actually all 7 of them up. And Rizpah, she was the mother of the 2 sons that was hung up as well. She began to stay right where they was hung at. She began to fan those birds and everything that would try to come eat her sons up. She began right there. She stayed there. She made her, basically her life was right there where her sons was hanging. And I'm saying this to say that in the midst of losing my son and and looking at the video and seeing that my son was killed unjustly, the Lord birthed something in me that, what happened to Oscar has happened over and over and over and over and over again. And unless you speak up about what has happened to your son, okay, people will continue with their daily lives and go on. But because of what happened with Oscar, I am commissioned, I am empowered, I am encouraged to get up and fight for others. I'm encouraged to work with other mothers across this country and share what has happened with Oscar, and to say to other mothers, no matter what society says about your child, God has given you that child. And if you're not the voice for that child, nobody else is going to be the voice for your child. I don't care if your child makes mistakes. God has given you that child to love on that child, to encourage that child that they can still make it, that they can still go further. And oftentimes, because we don't do that, our society, of our community of people is the way it is. Because we don't do that. And guess what? The prison system is still waiting for our young men and our young women because that's where slavery still is. Anytime you go into a prison and you work and you get $1.65 an hour, that's still slavery. The judicial system was not made for us.
No.
Okay? It was not made for us. Don't get it twisted. When I walked into the court and the judge looked at us, no t-shirts of your son, you can't come in here. When he told us, when he said, if you don't tell these protesters to leave, I'm going to take 5 years to have this case go. I'm going to take as long as I want. I've already made up my mind. That's what the judge said. We had not even started trial. I want to tell you that the people who wanted to come into the courtroom, they had to be there at 6 o'clock in the morning in LA. They had to get a ticket. If their number was not called, they could not come into the courtroom. Okay? And they did that after lunch, the same thing. If you weren't there a certain time and you didn't have a ticket and your number's not called, you're not getting in. I want to tell you, if you think that the judicial system is for you, it is definitely not for our people. It was not made for us. You know, we were taught, my family, you know, believe in the police, believe in the judicial system. And I'm going to tell you, when we walked through, it gave me a whole nother fight. Okay? When the jury came back with the verdict of a gun enhancement charge and had convicted him of involuntary manslaughter, which would have gave him, with the gun enhancement charge, an additional 10 years, and the judge gets up after we said our statements. First, my brother said, Judge, I hope you don't throw this case. Because we already knew from what the judge said in the beginning. So the judge says, oh, I made a mistake. I gave the jury the wrong information. So I'm throwing out the gun enhancement charge. So he's not going to be charged with that. And I'm going to give him a year for good behavior. I'm going to give him 2 years for being a police officer. I'm going to give him a good, something. He gave him another year for something else. And I'm going to sentence him with an irrevocable probation, meaning that he didn't have to go on probation. I'm going to send him to county jail. So when they tell you that he went to prison, that he got a prison number, he got a county jail number. And so if it was us, our children would have been in San Quentin. They would have been in prison for the rest of their lives.
Absolutely.
And so it is imperative for us to fight for our young men, to find out where their trauma is coming from. You know, I heard the statistic he was talking about. The 7-year-old had seen all this stuff. Think about how young they are, and they see this type of trauma. And then they got to still go to school.
Absolutely.
And they still got to try to conduct themselves as if everything is normal, when in fact it's not normal. And they don't even know how to release what they saw, to release what happened to them, or to release what happened to their friend. We have to come up with a way to channel that frustration, the anger, all of it being bottled up inside. We have to come to a place where we are working with our youth. When we think about grief or we think about loss, there's like a delayed loss. Sometimes when it happens, it doesn't affect you right then.
Right.
Right? It may affect you 6 months later, a year later, and all of a sudden you're like, well, what happened? Why am I like this now? Because that delayed grief may have affected you. It could be a prolonged grief. It could go on for a long period of time. And again, we cannot say how long a person can grieve. We just have to pray for them, encourage them, be there for them, make sure that they're not going to hurt themselves behind it. You know, I thought about even this new case where the police went to the young lady's house and shot her through the window. She was playing with her nephew in Texas, they said, and they shot and killed her. And a month later, not even a month, I don't think, her father dies, right? And I'm saying that to say because we don't know how death or the loss of something affects a person. Even though they may say they're fine, when the funeral's over, sometimes you don't even hear from people. They come to the funeral, they're there, they may call you and say, well, what can I do for you? And then after the funeral ends, there's no more calls. There's no more nobody checking up on you. You're there all by yourself to deal with that loss. And then you're looking around, how do I deal with the loss? For some, they go to drugs and alcohol. For me, it was eating. I wanted to just eat cake, eat pies, eat ice cream. That was what I wanted to do. That's what was causing, that's how I was grieving with the emotion or the effect of it. And many people do all types of things. But it's important for us to remember that when our family or our friend loses a loved one, that they may go through the 5 stages of grief or loss. They may go through that denial. They may go through that anger. They may try to bargain and say, it should have been me. Well, God, why didn't you take me instead of taking him? They may go through that depression stage or the acceptance stage. But whatever stage they go through, we have to make sure we position ourselves to help them walk through that stage. Because I tell you, if I wouldn't have had people praying for me and supporting me, I don't know where I would be. I probably could be in John George somewhere. And believe me, I do know mothers who are there at that place right now. I do know mothers who have tried to drink themselves to death. Okay? I do know mothers who have tried to drug themselves, to get the pain to go away. Because it is an undescribable pain. And so, after the traumatic loss of a loved one, you might feel helplessness. You might feel anxiety. You'll feel shock. You'll feel disbelief. You'll say, is this just a dream? When am I going to wake up? But no, it's becoming a new reality for you. But what do? How do you handle that? How do you get past that? I always say to people, number one, is if you have a relationship with God, cry out to him.
Yes.
Cry out to him.
Yes.
Because God is a healer.
Yes, he is.
He will heal us everywhere that we hurt.
Yes.
He came to heal the broken and hearted.
Yes.
And we know that he knows exactly what we are going through. Because he seen his friend Lazarus die.
Yes.
So he knows what pain of losing a loved one can bring.
Yes.
And so, what do? We rally around each other. We hug each other. We encourage each other. We call each other. We send each other a card. We let each other know that you're not by yourself.
Yes.
I'm not going to let you walk through this alone. You ever had someone that you might know who lost someone, and you were maybe good friends with them, and at one time they were coming around, and all of a sudden they stopped coming around? And you kept saying, well, what happened with that person? Oftentimes that person is going through, and the devil would like you to be isolated.
Right.
Because if you are isolated from those that love you, all kind of things will go through your mind.
Right.
And then the temptation to do things to yourself will come into play. So I want to encourage you today that if you know someone who has lost a loved one and they're in that situation, give them a call.
Yeah.
Go knock on their door. Spend an hour with them. And you may not have the time, but if you spend that time can make a difference. That time can save their life and you not even know it.
Yeah.
Some of us, after we have a loss, experience all kind of pain. And I want to encourage you today that as you look at the effects of grief and you look at the effects of loss, that you don't try to put a time limit on it, but you try to be right there and encourage that person and let them know that you're there for them.
Yes.
That you'll support them.
Yeah.
That you will cry with them. That you will laugh with them. And sometimes you don't even have to say nothing. Just your presence being there makes the difference.
Yes. Right.
And so I want to encourage you as I close. As we look at the effects of losing a loved one, or as I look at the effects of losing my son, I again am encouraged to fight so other mothers don't have to go through the same thing.
Yeah.
I'm encouraged to try to get out here in these streets and work with the youth today to let them know that, you know what, you might have made a mistake, but you know what? God has created you. You are fearfully and wonderfully made.
Yes.
God has a gift inside of you, and only you can complete that gift. Only you can use that gift that God has given you. I can't do it, can't nobody else do it.
Right.
But God wants to use you
Yes.
for the purpose He created you for.
Yes.
So as you may go through different things in life, it's all right. But I'm going to support you, and I'm going to tell you when you're wrong.
Yes. Yes.
And that is where we must begin to do for our youth today, is to encourage them and let them know that you may make a mistake, but I'm here for you, and I'm going to encourage you. And in closing, loss, again, can be a number of different things. But as you look to the Lord, from which comes your help,
Yes.
everything that you lose, God will replenish it.
Yes.
He will replenish it. I may not have a son, I still have a granddaughter from him. I have a daughter and then another grandson. I have 150 sons out in the streets now. I've gained just a forest of sons that call me, a forest of daughters that come. Alea, thank you for coming. She's one of my daughters. So I'm just grateful that God replenishes.
Yes.
And so know that you are never, ever alone.
Yes.
That God is with you. And if you ever need the Oscar Grant Foundation, you can look us up. And we'll be there to support you in whatever you need. Thank you so much, Nicole.
Yes.